So it's a pleasure to have Eli Glazier here from Montgomery Planning. Eli is the multimodal transportation planning coordinator. He's the project lead on the county's first ever pedestrian master plan. So we've asked him on behalf of the Mobility and Traffic Committee and also the Pedestrian Bicycling Access and Safety Working Group to come and present where they are, what it entails, and how we can collaborate with the county on this endeavor. And I understand they're in the middle of the process. And actually, when I first met Eli, it was when we were starting to establish the Pedestrian Bicycling and Safety Access Working Group. He was pretty pivotal for helping to kind of conceptualize some of the initial work that the working group did, particularly our walkability audit and bikeability audit. He shared some materials that ultimately ended up to be what we use for our checklist, our auditing checklist, adapted some of those materials and shared some resources. So that was well over 2 years ago now. So I think he was just starting the master planning process then, or at least conceptualizing it. So it'll be really interesting to hear an update from Eli. And one other thing I'll note is that we're both, I found out by doing a little research today, we're both Penn State alums. So you're in good company.
Fantastic.
So over to you, Eli. Thanks for joining us.
Great. I'd love to be able to share my screen if I can. So yeah, my name is Eli Glazier, and I am the project manager for this pedestrian master plan that the county's doing. Like the council member said, this is the first master plan that the county has done that really thinks about pedestrian issues in a county-wide way. We've done a lot of smaller area plans over the years that may have talked about pedestrians, maybe incidentally to the larger transportation element of the plan. But this is really the first time we've done this. We've focused on pedestrians specifically. The roadmap for this presentation is essentially what is this plan, why we're doing this, the goals of the plan, how far along we are, the types of recommendations that will be in the ultimate plan document. Sort of the roadshow we're on now as part of this planning process is around these policy, design, and programming recommendations, which are these high-level recommendations that we would expect to lead to pretty significant pedestrian-friendly changes in the Department of Transportation, State Highway Administration, Montgomery County Public Schools, and sort of all of the other agencies that have a hand in determining, maintaining, building our pedestrian realm. And then I'll get into sort of the timeline and the path forward as well. Like was already said, this is the first time we're doing this. The goal of this plan overall is to make walking and rolling safer, more comfortable, more convenient, more accessible for people of all ages and abilities across the county. I think we like to say that all trips within a short distance in Montgomery County should become realistic pedestrian trips. And I think what that means is not that everyone's going to have to walk for these quarter-mile trips to the grocery store or to the park or to your friend's house or something like that. It's more about making sure that there are sidewalks that connect to where you need to go within a short distance. There are safe places to cross. The speed limit is such, and speed is controlled in such a way that people feel safe taking those trips on foot. Just really about more giving people options to get places on foot rather than sort of the status quo that exists today. This plan was specifically called for in the county's first Vision Zero action plan, which was published in 2017. For those who may not know, Vision Zero is an international philosophy that Montgomery County adopted in 2016 that essentially says that no number of traffic fatalities or severe injuries are acceptable on our roads. And knowing that pedestrians are disproportionately likely to be the ones severely injured or killed, a pedestrian master plan makes a lot of sense to try and make pedestrians safer and lower the number of people getting killed and severely injured on our roads. In addition, we know that making it safer and more comfortable to walk, making it easier for more people to walk has public health benefits, economic benefits, climate benefits, and equity benefits as well. The plan goals are, I think, first and foremost, to increase walking rates and satisfaction with the pedestrian experience. 2, to create a comfortable, connected, convenient pedestrian network. 3, to enhance pedestrian safety, and 4, to do all 3 of these in an equitable and just way. So to work to address historic inequities in comfortable and safe access, and to make investments with an eye towards equity as well. So this plan actually kicked off back in September 2019. I know I've had conversations with Kensington residents, both in terms of the sort of the local work that was going on in the town as part of the TLC project and the groundwork for that, and as part of other efforts over the course of the past few years. We kicked off this plan with meetings across the county to community groups, et cetera. We had a fairly robust social media engagement process around the plan as well, really trying to understand the issues that people had from a pedestrian perspective across the county. We built on that public engagement with sort of collecting more hard data for our existing conditions report, which was published in March of this year. The 4 main elements of that report are a countywide pedestrian level of comfort analysis, which we did, that essentially for every sidewalk, trail, street crossing in the county, looked at how wide the sidewalks were, how wide the separation from traffic is, the speed limit, the number of lanes you have to cross, collected a ton of really important contextual information to help understand what parts of the county were comfortable, what parts weren't, and how people in different parts of the county could access things like schools and parks and transit centers and things like that in a comfortable way. We also worked with Montgomery County Public Schools before COVID to do a student travel tally so we could understand for all the schools across the county, what percentage of the students walking or getting to and from school were doing so on foot, so we could understand opportunities to make it easier and safer for kids across the county to get to school. We looked at crash data for pedestrian crashes from 2015 to 2020 to understand where those crashes are happening and the contextual factors that may have led to those crashes that we could mitigate through this plan. And then last but not least, we conducted a countywide statistically valid survey of pedestrian perspectives and pedestrian activity, where we essentially sent out a postcard with a unique survey link to 60,000 households across the county, and worked with a consulting firm to appropriately weigh those responses based on demographics, to really understand a snapshot of the pedestrian experience in Montgomery County today in a way that United States Census data and other data sources that are more commonly used for pedestrian issues can't really get at. So those data sources, combined with some other data that we use from the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, summed up our existing conditions report, which identified, essentially, in many cases, supported the issues that were raised in our public engagement process at the beginning of the plan, but brought to light new issues as well. And then what we're doing now in our recommendation development period is looking at the issues from our public engagement, from the existing conditions, and making recommendations to address those issues. So this report can be found on our website, which is montgomeryplanning.org/walking here, and I'd encourage you to check that out. I'll go on to the recommendations now in the interest of time, but there are 5 types of recommendations. These high-level design, policy, and programming recommendations. There's going to be a recommendation that uses data to prioritize where future capital projects should be built in Montgomery County that deal with pedestrian safety issues. There's going to be a section about master plan pedestrian shortcuts. I think these are the connections that we're probably all familiar with, where we understand in Montgomery County that sidewalks and trails may not always be the most direct path between point A and point B. So over time, people have worn these trails, dirt trails through grass or gravel. So this set of recommendations is about making these connections more accessible, more formal, so people of all ages and abilities can take the shortest pedestrian path. And then there's also going to be recommendations in the plan about providing side paths, so wider pedestrian and bicycle facilities on our country roads, and then making sure that the way different parts of the county are classified for our Complete Streets Design Guide is appropriate given their levels of existing and future pedestrian activity. That Complete Streets Design Guide, if you haven't checked it out, I would highly recommend looking through it. Essentially, it's a collaborative effort between the planning department and the Department of Transportation to create a vision for all of the different types of streets in Montgomery County. So as private development happens, as public projects happen, we are making a conscious effort to design these streets and to build wider sidewalks and things like that. So the streets are rebuilt in a much more pedestrian friendly way. But today I think I'm here mostly to talk about, I'm prepared mostly to talk about these higher level recommendations. I think there's a lot of them. So we broke them out into 6 themes. The themes are build, which is pretty straightforward, about building things, maintain, about protecting and safeguarding the investments that we've made so they last generations to come. Protect is about protecting pedestrians. Expand access is about accessibility and getting towards a more universal design so people of all ages and abilities can get around safely in Montgomery County. Monitor is about keeping the planning department and the county honest in how we're implementing the plan and the quality and speed of that implementation. And then fund is a few recommendations that really reckon with the fact that we've really systemically underinvested in pedestrian infrastructure for decades now. And while the county has a lot of priorities, we may need to find some additional funding strategies to actually get pedestrian like sidewalks and improved intersections built in the timeline that we're really interested in doing so. So there's 34 higher level recommendations across these 6 themes. Each recommendation has several key actions beneath it, which are more specific, like generally more technical recommendations that as implementing those key actions will sort of satisfy the intent of the larger recommendation. So what I'm going to do now is go through the themes, sort of cherry picking some of the recommendations to talk about. And then if there's time at the end, we can always go back and talk about any other recommendations or any questions that people have. So the build recommendations, I think the main recommendation here is B1, which is essentially just to build sidewalks faster. So it's a set of key actions that I'll click on this so we can see. So pivoting the annual sidewalk program from a reactive request-driven program to an equitable data-driven one, reimagining public engagement for sidewalk construction. So we have the ability to incorporate these local perspectives on important context into the design, but the conversation is more about how a sidewalk can be built rather than if a sidewalk should be built at all. There's key actions in here about making sure that public buildings that the county's investing in, like libraries or schools, are building the walkways and bikeways along their frontage that they're supposed to through the master plans. So we're essentially holding the county to the same standard that we hold private development to when it comes to building sidewalks and bikeways, working to incorporate the use of temporary materials to create dedicated pedestrian space where a sidewalk may not make sense in the short term. So things like flex posts and bollards, which you may, if you've been over to Grove Street in East Silver Spring, there's a pilot going on right now about for dedicated pedestrian space that's not a concrete sidewalk. And then there's a few other key actions here as well. So that's, I think, a really key one. There's also B5 is about just improving lighting in general in the county. I think this is something that was borne out in our existing conditions work, but also was one of the key issues that was raised in our sort of in public meetings, the fact that it's really difficult as a pedestrian to see other pedestrians at night when you're walking in Montgomery County. And then it's very difficult as a driver or as a pedestrian to see or be seen when crossing at intersections. So this recommendation has key actions about how to improve lighting for pedestrians along pathways and at intersections, both in public space and then using private development as an opportunity to do that as well. I think probably the flashiest, the longest term recommendation in this set is about assuming county control of state highways. I think what we're trying to do with this recommendation is start the conversation about our state roads and whether or not they should remain state roads. I think the idea here is that we know that state roads are the ones that have most of the destinations in Montgomery County that people want to walk to. But at the same time, they're very dangerous to walk along or to cross, as you are familiar with in Kensington. So what we're trying to jumpstart with this conversation is the recognition that moving some of these roads, particularly in our downtowns and town centers, which Kensington is one of, moving these to county control to provide the county more flexibility in how they're designed and how they operate. So you could potentially make wider sidewalks or change the signal timing or do these things that would make it easier to walk along and to cross these roads. And then at the same time, I think there's just a good governance element of this. I think people on this call, in this meeting, who have reached out to Montgomery County DOT about an issue that only to find that the issue is actually about a state road. So you get punted to somebody at the State Highway Administration or the Department of Transportation at the state level. And I think there just has to be a recognition that that's an incredibly frustrating process for community members. I think people see the government. They don't see different jurisdictions within the government that have different rights, roles, and responsibilities. So the extent to which we as a county can stop passing the buck to another agency, another department, another level of government, and really take responsibility for these roads, I think we'd see it would be easier to accomplish the goals that we have from a Vision Zero perspective, from a pedestrian safety perspective. And I think it's just a good accountability, good governance measure. I'm going to move on. We can always go back to that. The next set of recommendations is maintenance. The key recommendation here is MA1, which is about being more proactive about fixing sidewalks. So the key part of this is about creating an annual sidewalk inspection program at Montgomery County DOT, where a different part of the county would be inspected every year, sort of in a rotating basis. And as issues are identified in that inspection, they would be mitigated. They would be repaired by the county so that essentially we can catch smaller issues before they become bigger issues. So we can save money and create and maintain our sidewalks in a really good state of repair. I think as a county, we already monitor pavement quality, pavement condition in the roadway. And I think sidewalks, to the extent that they are repaired without a 311 request from a resident, are repaired sort of incidental to roadway projects. So if a roadway is being repaired and there's sidewalks that have issues in that immediate vicinity, the sidewalks are repaired. That's not necessarily the right approach, given that these things don't decay at the same rate. There are different problems that sidewalks have than roadways have. MA2 is about recommendations to keep sidewalks and curb ramps clear of vegetation, of trash receptacles, of snow, just being more proactive as a county in doing that maintenance. And then also just improving the quality of education about property owner responsibilities around these issues. So we aren't sort of perpetuating obstructions in the sidewalk that can create really dangerous situations on roads where there isn't a buffer, the sidewalk's really narrow, and people end up biking or walking into the street because there's a blockage on the sidewalk. Protect these recommendations. I think the key recommendation here is about disincentivizing dangerous vehicles. I think we need to reckon with the fact that we're in a pedestrian safety crisis right now that is largely due to these larger, taller trucks and SUVs that have very poor pedestrian visibility. So there's recommendations in this section to as a county, one, lead by example, so not purchase vehicles that have these demonstrated pedestrian safety issues, and also invest as a county in intelligent speed management software. So county employees, when they're driving around, are doing so in a way that adheres to the speed limit. There's also recommendations in here about improving driver education, especially for drivers that own and operate these larger and more dangerous vehicles. And then also a component of improved driver education in general at license renewal time. So using the license renewal process as an opportunity to update people on traffic laws that may have changed since their last renewal, update people on signalization or potential different infrastructure treatments that may have changed since their last renewal, just so people can stay as up to date as possible on sort of the changes to the roadway and to the transportation system. There's recommendations in here about making the walk to school safer, so providing a more robust safe routes to school program so people can feel confident allowing their kids to walk to school, having more crossing guards, providing more funding for crossing guards and things like that. There's also an education component here, providing pedestrian safety education in more languages than we do today and in more places than we do today. So branching out from just schools to rec centers, libraries, other civic buildings, so we can educate a wider variety of people in the county. And then I think one thing we found where from the crash data was that while this isn't a large issue from a severity and fatality perspective, there are a disproportionate number of crashes happening in parking lots that involve pedestrians. So thinking about ways we can create better, more pedestrian friendly parking lot design so the conflicts between pedestrians and people driving cars are minimized is something that we're also working on through this plan. The next set of recommendations is about expanding access, which is largely about accessibility and making the pedestrian realm more accessible to people with mobility issues, with visual impairments and other disabilities. The low-hanging fruit here is really reducing tripping hazards, making sure that we're maintaining sidewalks in a state of good repair, so there aren't tripping issues, there aren't slipping issues. This is a really big issue that came up in conversations with the Commission on People with Disabilities and people who are using wheelchairs across the county. Sort of a tag-along issue to that is removing sidewalk obstructions. So working really diligently and proactively at this point to get utility poles, to get traffic signal boxes, to get these things that are blocking the sidewalks, that are narrowing sidewalks, to get them out of the sidewalks. There's recommendations in here about providing additional capital at the countywide level to invest in moving these things, and then to essentially develop practices moving forward so that as utility companies replace telephone poles and things like that, they're doing so in a way that requires them to move them from the sidewalk. So they're not just placing a pole right next to another pole, but still in the sidewalk. There's recommendations in here about improving wayfinding for pedestrians with low or no vision. So providing people who are blind more tactile feedback when it comes to wayfinding so they can more safely and confidently navigate around Montgomery County. There's also recommendations in here to expand the number of sort of park offerings that Montgomery Parks has to be more inclusive of people who are blind or may have intellectual disabilities or mobility concerns. And then last but not least in this section, I think construction zones have been for a while now sort of a hotbed of sort of pedestrian issues when it comes to the extent to which a detour is provided for pedestrians through construction zones. And I think some work was done on this by council right at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, but I think there are still opportunities to improve on that and provide more pedestrian priority through these areas, and making sure that any construction zones that anytime there's a construction zone, the sort of one of the first priorities is reopening that space to pedestrians as soon as possible. Monitor, like I said, the main recommendation here is about tracking implementation of this plan. So making recommendations here to, we're going to have a report, a monitoring report that tracks progress of this plan posted every 2 years. And we're going to have an interactive website where people can see the progress we've made as a county in achieving the performance metrics that the plan will lay out. And then also how many miles of sidewalk we've built, where those miles of sidewalk are, et cetera, just like a dashboard of pedestrian issues for the county, which is something that doesn't really exist today. And then the last bit here, identifying new revenue sources to fund pedestrian improvements. We tried to be pretty creative about this. I think there's probably opportunities we didn't identify, but we talked about things like charging market prices for on-street parking and using the difference between what that price is and the price today to fund pedestrian and bicycle improvements in the area around where that on-street parking is. Charging higher vehicle registration fees for these larger vehicles, which is something that Washington, D.C. recently has done, and using the difference between the current registration fee and that higher fee to fund bicycle and pedestrian projects. I think there's also an opportunity to do a broader based tax on people. One of the example jurisdictions that we've looked at as part of this plan is the city of Seattle. And Seattle voters actually have voted, I think, a couple of times now to tax themselves a specific increment of either, I think, sales tax or property taxes to fund pedestrian projects. So I think that's a potential opportunity here if Montgomery County voters thought that pedestrian issues were a high enough priority that they would be willing to pay more money to accomplish some of these things. I think that's a potential option as well. So that's all of the higher level recommendations. So I'm going to talk really briefly about the second thing here, which is about prioritizing locations for pedestrian capital projects across the county, because there's, I think, a pretty cool opportunity for public engagement on this item at the moment. So essentially what we'd like to do is create a prioritization approach for where in the county we should be investing money in these issues, but using data to do that and trying to be transparent about where the inputs that we have and what data we use to identify which parts of the county are a priority. So one way we did that is we created this pedestrian prioritization tool, which is available on our website and I can distribute, which essentially there's some explanatory text on the website, but it comes down to essentially this map and the sidebar on the right, which has essentially different variables. So I want to invest pedestrian capital dollars in places where there's a lot of pedestrians, places where there's more pedestrian crashes, missing sidewalks, equity, focus, greater school access, et cetera. There's essentially 10 different factors. And as a user of this map, you get 100 points to spend to distribute between these factors. And the factors you think are more important can get, you can spend more money on those, more points on those factors. So if you thought that investing in areas with missing sidewalks was equally important with an equity focus, you could put 50 points in one and 50 points in the other. And then you can actually click visualize. And this map on the left will show you where, if those are your priorities, where that investment would be targeted. And you can see on the screen, I just said 10, 10, 10 equal across the board. And you can see that parts of Germantown pop up, Montgomery Village, Durwood, Aspen Hill, Bethesda, Silver Spring, and East County along the US 29 corridor, for instance. So that's just one weighting as an example, but as community members, I would encourage you to check out this tool, play around with it. You can visualize multiple different scenarios, and then you can actually submit your prioritization to us so we can take that and incorporate that into the ultimate prioritization we move forward with as part of this plan. So again, that tool is on our website at montgomeryplanning.org/walking here, and you can also review all of the policy recommendations that I just really breezed through really quickly you can see the key actions, and then each key action also has a narrative rationale, so much more information beyond what I've said, sort of describing what the implications of that action would be, and if there are relevant precedents, and who the lead agency would be for that project, and what goals that key action helps address. So the last thing I have, the timeline moving forward. I've been, like I said, doing this roadshow for the past several months about these recommendations and where we are in the plan. I presented these recommendations to the planning board on September 22nd to get their feedback. We've incorporated their feedback we're continuing to incorporate their feedback. I'll be continuing community engagement about this plan through the end of the year. At the same time, I'm writing the draft plan, which is mostly just stitching together the existing conditions report, the recommendations pieces of this with an introduction. And then we anticipate the work sessions for this plan beginning with the planning board in January of 2023. So we anticipate having a public hearing probably around January 15th. And then we'll start the work sessions on this plan sort of in the next few weeks after that. And then if you're not familiar with the process, the plan then moves to county council, where there's another public hearing, and this plan will have work sessions at the T&E committee, the Transportation and Environment Committee, before going on to the full council to be voted on for approval and adoption. And at that point, it will be the master plan will be approved and adopted. So I think this whole process will hopefully pan out over the course of early to mid 2023. But there's still, I think, really good opportunity now to participate in shaping these recommendations. And then when the draft plan is released to the public and the public hearing date is set, there'll be opportunities to submit written and oral testimony as well, which would be, again, in early 2023. So I talked for a long time. I'm sure there's probably questions or concerns or critique, and I would welcome that if there's time.
Tracy, did you want to moderate, or do you want?
Well, I have a couple of questions. That's the great thing about being mayor. I get to go first, but
That's what I thought.
and then you can moderate the rest.
No, go for it.
Eli, thank you for the presentation. That was really great. I just have a couple of questions. Has SHA, have they adopted the Vision Zero? You said it was national or international.
Yeah, so the philosophy sort of originated in Sweden, and different communities around the world have adopted it as something that they aim to achieve. Montgomery County, the Department of Transportation, et cetera, adopted it, like I said, in 2016. To my knowledge, the State Highway Administration and the state of Maryland have not adopted it. They use an approach called Towards Zero Deaths, which is not as elegant, I would say. I think clearly there is support at State Highway Administration for reducing fatalities and severe injuries on our roads, but it's less of an absolute goal and more of like a distant, something to aspire to. So yeah, I think not formally, they haven't formally adopted it.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. We had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with MCDOT as well as some other municipalities of how the state highway doesn't quite understand Vision Zero and and what we can do. There was no solution in our conversation, but it is a challenge because they don't move very quickly. So they always want to study things, which sometimes that's good, but anyway, thank you. Another question. You're strictly looking at pedestrian. It does not include bicycles, because every time we talk, it seems like we have to have bikes and pedestrians. So I'm just wondering, how does your plan work with bikes?
So the last time I spoke to this group, it was a different group, but the same, the Town of Kensington Council was about the Bicycle Master Plan, which was adopted in 2018. So this plan is specific to pedestrians. I think if you have, I'm very knowledgeable about that plan and sort of the interplay between the pedestrian and bicycle issues. So if you do have a question about that interplay or bicycles, I can answer that too.
Well, I guess it's more of in the new planning, are you trying to include, in a new development, are you looking at bikes and pedestrians? I mean, we find a lot of times in older development areas, there just simply is not the room to have good pedestrian walkways and bike lanes, that we're having this problem on a Kensington Parkway where they're just simply, and to provide parking on top of that. So that, I guess that's the question but
yeah, I think that is the question, is to provide parking or not. I think in a lot of the down county, when it's built out there isn't the right of way to get every single priority. So I think this is, again, just ringing the bell again for the Complete Streets Design Guide. If you look at that document for different street types, there's default widths for different things. So different streets have different elements. So some have parking, some don't. Some have 6-foot sidewalks, some have 10-foot sidewalks. And there are default widths, which we would insist on from a private development. But then there are also minimum widths, there are preferred widths. So it creates this spectrum of different options to work with a constrained right of way. And I think what we'd like to convey with this plan is that in sort of the hierarchy of needs, pedestrians are above bicyclists. But I think both of them are probably above car storage, if that makes sense. So I think that's the lens through which the planning department is really looking at how to mediate between these different needs and desires within the public right of way.
Okay, I appreciate that. 2 more quick questions. Well, one's not a question. Thank you for the educational component. I think that's really important, particularly in the immigration community, where I happen to live with an immigrant, and when he was 16 and came to this country, he had no idea about traffic. I mean, he just stepped out into a road. So, I think that is a really big thing about, education. And we have a constant problem with the 6-lane of Connecticut Avenue, and people like to cross it mid-block. That is just, and it's of all ages. It's not just kids, it's seniors, which is really frustrating. And lastly, on your survey, you said you sent out 60,000. What was the return on that?
Yeah, so we worked with a consultant who cautioned us that we should probably expect like 1,200 response. We got like 2,400 response, which gave us a margin of error at the countywide level of about 2%.
Okay.
So yeah, I think we're really happy with the response rate, actually. And it's something we're looking to do to repeat, so we can sort of track some of the metrics we have in the plan are about satisfaction with different things. So the extent to which we can monitor that over time is really important to us in terms of measuring how we're implementing the plan. So yeah, I think this is also something you're going to see more of from the planning department, is just obviously continuing to do public engagement like we're having right now, but also to take a higher level view and to reach out more countywide and in a more scientific way with surveys and things like that.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Nate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a bunch of questions too, but I think I'd prefer to let everyone go first. And then if those questions aren't asked, I can do the cleanup, but maybe turn into the council first. And see Anne, I'm sure Connor will come in next. Okay, Anne?
Okay. Thanks so much, Eli, for the presentation. I think it's very helpful in the way that you're organizing the plan and also organizing the process, I think has been great. So one question I have is on the fund aspect, and would love to hear you address how you're looking at any of the funding sources now available through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And in particular, what the county's process will be for sort of prioritizing which projects how your prioritization process fits with the timing for some of those programs, because we want to make sure that we can be a part of that for any priority projects in our area.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we haven't really gotten that far in terms of that specific funding source. I do know that MCDOT is pursuing funding through those avenues already, and our parks colleagues, I think, are also putting together and have put together requests for funding through those channels. I think that the timing of this is such that once this is adopted and approved, we'll be working really closely with the Department of Transportation to assess the projects that they're thinking of doing through this prioritization lens, so we can move forward with the projects that provide the highest value for the county. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts or perspectives?
Yeah. I understand wanting to have a final plan and go through the full engagement process, but given that it is a lengthy process, I would encourage you to start talking with them sooner about the deadlines for all the various pedestrian safety funding programs and how they are getting organized so that we don't miss out on an opportunity. Because I bet you've already probably developed enough tools that
that's fair.
You can inform their process around prioritization. And that's something, I think, Nate, we can talk further about with the council and the committee, but I imagine that we would want to continue to talk to you about as well.
Yeah, happy to continue to be a resource in that to the extent that I can.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Connor, Darren?
Darren, you can go.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the presentation, and I'm kind of mindful of a couple things as I listen to you. For example, the prioritization of pedestrians over cyclists over car storage. I mean, I get that, but we all are at different times in one of those modes. And I remember years ago, somebody wrote in the Washington Post that when you're a pedestrian, you hate cars and bicyclists. When you're a bicyclist, you hate cars and pedestrians. When you're a motorist, you hate pedestrians and cyclists. And I just feel like we are constantly in tension with the modes that we're not currently in. And to me, I don't know if you've ever played the game Frogger on the computer, but
sure.
It's things moving at different speeds. And when you have cars going, 30 to 50 miles an hour, and you have bikes and e-bikes going 20 and scooters going speeds, and then pedestrians, it almost seems like it's to the point where the driver, which is the most dangerous because he's surrounded in steel and he can hit things that are not nearly as protected as he is. It's almost like a saturation point for the driver. And so I appreciate the pedestrian master plan, but I think I feel like the integration with a complete assessment of safety for everybody out there is probably the greater priority. One specific thing came to mind with your presentation. You talked about higher registration for these vehicles that you consider to be dangerous. I mean, I'm thinking of and again, I know we're here to talk about pedestrians, but I'm thinking of the cyclist who was killed in Bethesda recently. We won't get rid of dump trucks. We need dump trucks. Everybody needs dump trucks at one point in their life, whether we're rebuilding roads or building houses. And so as you're thinking about funding, you might consider not just taxing higher these vehicles that we're not going to be rid of, but incentivizing with lower fees for cars that have sort of the collision avoidance features that are targeting, that are specifically designed to protect pedestrians. Doesn't help fund your projects, but I think, when I bought my Chevy Volt many years ago, Maryland provided me with a $2,400 tax incentive, and that was important in the purchase decision. And I just think that given the saturation that I feel exists with all the different modes out there, we need some technology help to solve that. And I think the cars, whether they're self-driving eventually or at least have tools built into them, that's really where we're going to make a lot of headway with protecting pedestrians, because I think they think better than we do. So, but thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, no, thanks for your perspective.
Hey, Eli, thank you for the presentation. I've got a couple of thoughts, some that might be contained within the plan, and then some that cross over into other actions, like that would be more county council. The first, you described the proactive repairs that, the vision you guys are working on in the plan is to inspect the total, the sidewalks annually in a section by section, zone by zone, area by area across the county. What more how realistic is that? Is it what is the technology you'll be using? How do we know, how do you do a quality control to know that these sections have been checked? How are we able to input information in there? If this system were open to the public, couldn't you get hundreds of eyes on Sidewalk as opposed to a small group from transportation that's going around annually?
Yeah, I think the recommendation, the sort of gist of the recommendation, the bulk of it is more about just being more proactive and diligent about understanding the maintenance issues that exist and that are on the rise. I think we're sort of agnostic as a department on what the approach is. Like, I think it would be great if the Department of Transportation had an asset management system where where everyone, the public and sort of the bureaucracy, could see for each sidewalk segment, like what condition it was in based on some objective scale that exists across the country. Like in my prior life, I was in the private sector doing bicycle pedestrian planning consulting across the country. And there are sort of visual and narrative descriptions of like different levels of sidewalks that are in various states of repair or disrepair. So something like that exists. Like, there are criteria around these sorts of things. So whether it's putting it out to the public and having some sort of shared monitoring system, or a team of a few inspectors who just every year they go to a different part of the county when they're not doing, like, in the downtime, like sometimes there's like a construction season, right? So people are monitoring construction, they're building things, highway services is doing maintenance, and then at a certain point it becomes too cold, really, the weather's too bad to do these projects. So there's opportunities to sort of reallocate that labor into doing something like this. So maybe that's the option. I think we're just saying in this plan that the goal we want to get to is a proactive approach to doing this. And however the county chooses to do that, I think would be great. We're sort of agnostic on the specific method.
Yeah, as you go back and you have conversations, I think there's a real opportunity to engage the public, not just on writing the plan, but on, the maintenance. If the tools are there, which we have a lot with GIS and other things, if there's an inventory system where people can self-report. Now, are they going to be necessarily as trained or knowledgeable? No, but I look at and I think about what, Nate helped start with, essentially the inventory of our whole town for our pedestrian safety bicyclist working group. And he, set out, here are the criteria, here's the education, put on a vest, mark the areas around the town that you think we have a sidewalk issue. And I just think there's a real opportunity, instead of putting it as, in other assigned activity to a few staff members. I feel like this is a huge county. There's a ton of stuff. Will that downtime ever come? Recipe for success might be low. You could empower your citizenry to go out and help, light up the map for you.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I guess I would push back a little bit and just think about the fact that we don't ask the public to do this for roads. Like, I don't think it should be the community's responsibility to make sure that the sidewalks are in a state of good repair. Like, these are certain things that the government should do.
I agree. However,
Can we
doing
do
it,
pothole reports? Yeah.
yeah, and it's about time to fix, right? So we can, if you spread it out to the masses, you get thousands of eyes on it. You can get a lot of reports, a lot of data really fast, and then start prioritizing. If you have it in this, we're going to do sections of the county little by little, 1 year at a time. And so it might be 6 years before we come back to your neck of the woods.
Mhm.
I just think by the time you're going to have things reported and not fixed for years.
I think that's possible. I think it's just comes down to how it's implemented.
Just a thought.
Yeah, totally.
And then the other one goes, because this happens, we see this with SHA, not to say MCDOT, but there will be some sort of improvement approved, and then they go to do the work, and they will only do that specific work, which is in that specific work order, as opposed to thinking, hey, we have a system that we're going out to this section of the county. Let's look at all of the approved work orders and trying to make all the improvements we can in that area. So this just goes to the process, because it was frustrating for us. This isn't your problem, but it's the best example I have, where SHA came out to make a change that was approved 5 or 6 years previous. And we knew there were subsequent issues in the very same section that had been approved. And they're like, well, that's not this work order. You got to wait 3 years till that work order comes to the top of the queue. So,
yeah.
The last comment I had was only because our neighbors to the south are working on it right now, the District of Columbia, and that is looking at how to change traffic laws as opposed to just the built physical infrastructure to also try and meet Vision Zero. And so they expressly just recently were looking at just outlawing right turns on red universally across the district. Is that something, where would you all would that be like a recommendation that you would send to the county council? What other traffic law changes are you all looking at that, hey, these aren't necessarily to do with the built physical infrastructure. This is permitted, movements that if we just change the traffic laws, it's not to say it'll change behaviors, right? People violate traffic laws all the time. But if we change it, then we can put in an enforcement and an education piece, maybe in the opposite order, to over time change behaviors.
Yeah, so I think there is a recommendation in this plan to make no turn on red the default in downtowns and town centers. So Kensington being a town center. So our more pedestrian friendly areas today. I think there's also there will be a recommendation in the plan to look at minimizing the use of what are called permissive left turns. So a left turn across traffic without a signal, without a left turn arrow, because those are very dangerous for drivers and then also for pedestrians sort of on the receiving leg of that turn. So looking into ways to work to either prohibit left turns or more likely to add dedicated left turn signals. So when left turns are happening, there's no sort of parallel pedestrian conflicts. And then the last piece, I lost my train of thought, but yes, I think, the last piece is changing our crosswalk yielding law from one where a pedestrian needs to be in the crosswalk, which is what it is today, which is, I think, very poor at leading to actual yield behavior because drivers really kind of intimidate pedestrians from entering the crosswalk, to what we see in Virginia, which is pedestrians get the right of way, should be yielded to at the crosswalk. So you are just sort of about to enter. So that's another it's a safety issue if there's enforcement and people actually adhere to it, but it's also, yeah, it's a safety issue. I think there's an element of convenience there as well. Being more confident that at an uncontrolled crosswalk, so one where there's no stop signs or traffic signals, that you'll be able to cross safely. And I think education is obviously a big piece of that. And then there's potentially enforcement actions. I think crosswalk stings are like fairly popular traffic enforcement behaviors from members of the law enforcement community. So,
and this will be my last one. And I appreciate all the time you're giving to questions. I don't know. I will be honest, based on what you were just saying about how the crosswalk law works. When you have a divided road where there's some sort of boulevard or median, but there might not be an island, a pedestrian island in the middle, right? It's just a long crosswalk. How does it work? If they're way over 3 lanes over on the other side before a median, is the opposite traffic expected by law to stop?
I'd have to look at the regulation, but I'm fairly certain you have to yield if a pedestrian is in your lane or the adjacent lane.
Okay.
Which is confusing, right? Because we all know the school bus law is if it's undivided, it's every lane.
Yeah.
So that is different from the school bus law.
Okay, I'll yield. Thank you.
Thank you.
See, I knew you had questions, Connor. So I think if I might, most of my questions were actually answered by everybody, or already asked by everyone and answered by you, Eli. I just had one before maybe opening to the public. One specific question, and then one just more general about recommendations and how we can help and implement them here. How receptive on your B10 recommendation about the county taking over the state highways within the county, how receptive have other county officials, technocrats, or whoever this recommendation has been presented to, as well as the state? How receptive have they been? And then I'll ask you my last question.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, they haven't been. I think there's some heartburn at the county government. So just for people who don't know, the planning department is not a county agency. We're a separate agency. So we are a quasi-state agency. So when we make recommendations, we are not the implementing agency generally. So the Department of Transportation, other agencies are the ones that implement the plans. We just create the vision and the recommendations to achieve that vision. So yeah, I think there's some heartburn, there's some concern about the potential cost implications on the county side. And I think that's completely understandable. I think if something like this were to move forward, we would need to be very clear about how the shift in maintenance and operations responsibilities would have at the same time a shift in funding to do that maintenance from the state level to the county level. I think there's probably also some upfront capital costs we would need to incur from a purchasing perspective when it comes to like vehicles and potential more employees and things like that. The state, which I think is all surmountable. I think these things can be figured out if the county is interested in pursuing this. The state has been silent on this recommendation and on most of the recommendations in this plan. We have, in addition to a community advisory group from across the county, we've had an interagency working group of members, stakeholders from the different agencies that are going to be implementing the plan. For the whole, since 2019, we've had this group and we've met at every stage of the process. And yeah, there's not been a lot of response from the state on any of these recommendations, but especially that one. I think you'll find, if you've been following the conversations about Vision Zero and about pedestrian safety and pedestrian connectivity at the council and at the planning board for the past several years, I think there is an appetite to explore this from elected officials. What form that takes, again, not totally sure, but I think the twin goals of providing more design flexibility and being more responsive and accountable are sort of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I thank you for that. I saw our town manager, Matt Hoffman's eyes light up when I said, I think maybe he's wanting to take it one step further on the town take over the state roads, but I'll let him speak for
I mean,
himself.
please.
I'm just
please,
kidding.
by all means.
The last question is just really how can we help you and how you might be able to help us. So we, Connor mentioned this audit that we do. With your help, we had I said in the beginning, the survey that we produced, and we're going to do it again. We make it essentially a biannual thing. So this is going to be done for the second time this coming fall. We audit all the streets. It's not just pedestrians, it's for cycling and safety, lighting, and so on. So is there a way to use that to integrate into this? What can we do as a town to help besides providing a letter of support and public commenting period for this? And then very specifically, we've had, you referenced this TLC grant that we did with the county and Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. We have the state highway or the state highway we're going to be working with to do our state bicycling pedestrian priority area designation. But we know already, I mean, I've used the prioritization tool that you showed. It shows Connecticut Avenue, no matter how you slice it, and Knowles Avenue are high priorities. We identified solutions. How can we leverage this master plan? Or do you have recommendations for how we get these things prioritized and implemented now? I mean, we know what we need to do essentially.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I was going to say letter of support, public testimony. I think a recognition that we need more money to do these things. If we can make the pot bigger, I think a lot more projects can obviously get built that need to be built. I think I would wait and see what the prioritization approach we end up moving forward with ultimately is. But I think using that and then pointing to the specific projects that you've already identified to address the issues on those roads I would hope be very effective in working to make those priorities over the next several years of the capital improvement program. I think the frustration that I have, I think that everybody has around these issues is that it's it always takes longer than you think it will. And I'm sure anyone who participated in that TLC and worked with the stakeholders from the county and the state on that project are well aware of that and the timelines that were provided to get some of these things built. So I think design takes time, and the earlier that you can work with your council members here and at the county level to make those projects priorities, I think that's probably a winning strategy. Relying on the recommendations in the plan, just pointing to what we're going to be doing essentially at the planning department when we work with private development, is pointing to recommendations in the plan, pointing to priorities we've identified in the plan, and saying, this is in the master plan. Can you make this happen along your frontage or in your property and things like that? And I think there are opportunities for you all to do something similar and push county government in that way. Essentially, when this document is approved by county council, it sort of becomes what the county wants to do when it comes to pedestrian issues. On the private side, it has, I wouldn't say quite the force of law, but it's a binding document that we need to enforce as a department. So the extent to which you all, but also advocates in general, can push the county to honor the commitment it's made by approving this document to actually implementing it, I think would obviously be tremendously helpful.
Well, yeah, thanks. I hope there's a lot more of you there ready to implement it when you get all of the requests coming in once it's passed. So
yeah, definitely.
No, Tracy, yeah.
It's 8:10. I certainly want to give the public an opportunity. We have a fairly light agenda tonight. So if we can take no more than the next 20 minutes. So if the public has one question, that would be great. And then we can close it out by 8:30.
I saw Jack has had his hand up for a while, and then I see Alan, Simon.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you for an excellent and very thorough presentation. You've obviously put a lot of work into it. I have 3 suggestions that would be inexpensive and easy to implement and would result in significant improvements. First, I suggest that instead of putting the sidewalk right next to the curb, you offset it away from the curb so that people walking don't get splashed when it rains, and you don't have to watch out. So some trucks and school buses have side view mirrors that stick way out. Second, regarding bicycles, I've noticed bicycle lanes that are outside toward the center of the street from the parking lane. I suggest it would work better in some places like the city of Montreal and all, offset the parking and then have the bike lane between the parked cars and the curb. Thirdly, as an astronomer, I feel it's important to preserve dark skies. I agree with you that you need to illuminate the walkways and all, but it's important that they be shielded so all the light goes down and you don't waste light going up, which only illuminates the underside of birds. Thank you.
Yeah, all fantastic suggestions. Again, I would encourage, to the extent possible, we are not making recommendations to build sidewalks immediately next to the curb. I think Kensington residents, anyone who lives along a state highway or works or is familiar with that and how dangerous it can be. So having a sidewalk, having a buffer between the sidewalk and the street, and then having the street is absolutely the standard across the county. And I think what varies really is how wide that sidewalk is and how wide that buffer is. But in all cases, we would expect the sidewalk to be offset like that. On the second point, I would encourage you to check out the bicycle master plan that we approved and adopted in 2018, because whether it's parking, we would call it a parking protected bike lane, like you mentioned, or there's many other types of separated bike lane treatments that improve bicycle safety that are being built across the county, and you could sort of see the master plan for that in that document. And then on dark skies, absolutely. I think we actually are embarking with the Department of Transportation on a TLC project like Nathan and the Kensington team have done to improve our lighting standards. And one of the criteria we're looking at is making sure that the standards that we create are dark skies compliant. So thank you again.
And thank you.
Gallen, you were next.
Okay, thanks, Nate. And Eli, great information. Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on one of Nate's questions because I'm a part of the pedestrian and bicycle access work group. So as Nate said, we're about to undertake the walkability audit, and we can certainly take this offline if you want. But is there a way, either the questions we're asked, the information we're collecting, or how we are going to compile that might make it easier to feed into, you know, what you're putting together in your database? Because, you know, we do it biannually. If we can modify what we're doing or the way we're doing it now, it would be a great time to sync up.
Yeah, I think let's think about that more and connect maybe separately. We can maybe do a Teams meeting or something to talk about it a bit further.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I think I see one more question. It's from Joe Campbell.
Thank you, Nate, and welcome back, Eli. I'm Joe Campbell. I live on Frederick Place on the south side of Kensington, and I wholeheartedly endorse the notion of at the crosswalk rather than in the crosswalk. That's an important distinction, and it's really vitally important, crucial, I'd say, for pedestrian safety. So I think that was an important, if minor, observation that you made. And another one was I would love to see crosswalk stings that you briefly mentioned. I'd love to see crosswalk stings in Kensington, Maryland. I've never heard of them before, but I think that would also be a way of enhancing pedestrian safety. You mentioned that sidewalks connecting people to short walks, to short trips are imperative or important. Could you just clarify briefly what the plan specifically calls for in that regard? I may have missed it, but I very interested in knowing about that.
Yeah, so I think that's just kind of the vision that we have. If you look at sort of travel data, like how far people are going on trips on a daily basis, while the commute trip tends to be like the furthest trip, a lot of the travel that people take is within like 1 to 3 miles of their house. So the extent to which we can lay the groundwork for people to feel more comfortable taking those trips on foot, or in concert with the bicycle master plan by bike, we're going to help achieve the county's climate goals, safety goals, et cetera. There are no, I would say, specific recommendations other than in the Thrive plan to get to sort of this way of living so that all of the land uses you would need are within a short walking distance. But we're just trying through this plan to make sure the infrastructure is there to make those pedestrian trips viable.
Yeah, I think that's very important in a Kensington context because, you know, it's a small town.
Yeah.
But it lacks sidewalks in several parts of town, sidewalks that would make these kinds of short trips much more viable, much more tenable for residents. So I think that would be an important component. Would you speak for a few moments about how enforcement of traffic regulations and speed limits, even in small towns such as Kensington, would enhance pedestrian safety, or as you put it, the pedestrian experience?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think there are a few principles that we think about when it comes to speed and enforcement. I think ideally, our traffic laws would be self-enforcing. So we're essentially designing the roadway so that you can't exceed the speed limit. That clearly is not working and has not worked on something like Connecticut Avenue. So there's recommendations in the plan about improving and expanding the use of automated enforcement to provide sort of an unbiased, neutral observer when it comes to who is violating traffic laws. I think there's probably a role for, I think that's the extent to which we talk about enforcement. We talk about education as well. I think there are challenges with enforcement beyond the automated enforcement, just from an equity perspective, potentially. But I think if we're building the infrastructure as part of this plan, hopefully, and then making sure that people follow traffic laws is another vital component to ensure pedestrian safety.
Yeah, I think the two are inextricably linked. Automated enforcement, though, that's expensive and I think resented by a lot of people too. Is that a reason why it's not really highlighted in the emerging plan?
It is called out. It's in the funding section now, but I think we're moving it to the protect section with the understanding that if it's carried out successfully, it will actually lead to improved compliance, which would actually lead to reduced fines. So not really a long-term sustainable funding option for pedestrian infrastructure. Yeah, I think honestly, people don't like to get caught. So that's a frustrating thing. I think another issue we have is that the regulations about speed enforcement and automated enforcement in general are at the state level. Montgomery County does not have a lot of flexibility or a lot of control over the number or location of those cameras, which is something that I think the police department is keenly interested in improving the number of and location of where those cameras are, not from like a revenue perspective for them. I think the revenue is required to go towards pedestrian safety and other similar improvements. It's more about if it allows law enforcement to focus on other things and have traffic enforcement be done in sort of a neutral, automated way. So I think there are just challenges. There's obviously public opinion challenges about some of this. I'm I hear what they're saying. I'm not like, it doesn't really do it for me. I think if you drive the speed limit, you'll be in good shape with that sort of enforcement.
And finally, and very briefly, I was wondering if you might just describe these enforcement stings at crosswalks, how they work, and
Yeah,
who conducts
yeah.
them.
So I've never witnessed one personally, but
Nor have I.
But often there are there'll be like a newscast in local news about it, but essentially like an undercover officer or something will walk across the street in like a legal way, and they'll make a note. Somebody will be observing them, and they'll make a note of who yielded and who didn't, and then a cop car hiding around the corner will then go pull over that person. So that's, I think, in its simplest form, what that sort of enforcement could look like. Whether that's punitive or educational, I think that's up to the officer's discretion.
Or is it more of a stunt, Eli?
Okay, thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
So I think we had maybe time for one more question, if there was one. I don't know, Larry, Wanamaker, were you raising your hand? Did I see it fly up there? If not, just stay muted. I think that's it, Tracy. I think that we have exhausted all the questions.
Okay.
Thanks so much. And again, feel free to distribute my email and some of the links to the website and things like that. I'm happy to talk to anyone else or get feedback from people on the recommendations in the next few weeks.
Okay, thank you, Eli. Really appreciate you coming tonight and providing this information. It was very, very interesting, and and hopefully, like the bike master plan and the other plans that the county has adopted, that we'll see things, actually happen.
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
Thank you. Yep. Have a good night.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
Eli.